The bank manager's letter arrived on a Tuesday, and Keira Prescott knew before she even opened it that her world was about to collapse like a mine shaft with rotted timber supports. She stood on the porch of the weathered ranch house her father had built 20 years ago, staring at the official seal pressed into the wax. And for the first time since Papa died 3 months back, she felt truly alone in the vastness of California's Central Coast. The letter confirmed what she had feared. Without a husband or male relative to co-sign, the bank was calling in the loan her father had taken 2 years prior to buy additional grazing land. She had 30 days to pay the full amount of $800 or forfeit everything: the house, the land, the cattle that bore the Prescott brand on their hides. It was 1882, and the law was clear as spring water and just as cold. An unmarried woman could not hold property of significant value without a man's name attached to the deed. Keira crumpled the letter in her fist and looked out at the rolling hills that stretched toward Watsonville proper, 3 miles east. The September sun painted everything gold and amber, the grass rippling like an ocean under the coastal breeze. Her father had loved this land with a fierce devotion, had poured his sweat and years into making it productive. She would be damned if some banker in a pressed suit would take it from her without a fight. The problem was simple. She needed a husband, and she needed one fast. The solution, however, was considerably more complicated. Keira spent the evening going through her limited options. There was Thomas Bell, the grocer's son who had been sweet on her since they were children. But Thomas had already married Ruth Connolly last spring. Samuel Wright, the blacksmith, was nearly 60 and still mourning his wife of 30 years. The young ranch hands who worked the neighboring properties were either too poor to help with the debt or too interested in moving on to richer prospects further north. She sat at her father's old desk, the lamp burning low, and faced the bitter truth that she had no real prospects in Watsonville itself. That was when she remembered the drifter. 2 weeks ago, a cowboy had come through looking for work. She had been mending fence along the eastern boundary when she spotted him riding a tall roan gelding, his hat pulled low against the sun. He had the look of a man who had been traveling hard, dust coating his clothes and stubble darkening his jaw. But his eyes had been kind when he asked if she had work available, and his voice had carried a Texas drawl smooth as aged whiskey. She had told him she could not afford to hire anyone, not with the ranch barely breaking even. He had tipped his hat politely and asked if she could at least spare some water for his horse. She had done better than that, offering him a meal and letting him sleep in the barn for the night. Over supper, he had introduced himself as Matthew Morgan, a ranch hand who had worked spreads from San Antonio to Sacramento. He was 26, never married, and searching for a place to settle now that the open range was disappearing under fences and railroad tracks. In the morning, he had thanked her kindly, fixed the hinge on the barn door without being asked, and ridden west toward the coast. She had watched him go and thought it was a shame that decent men like that never seemed to stay in one place long enough to put down roots. Now, she wondered if he had put down roots anywhere yet. More importantly, she wondered if she could find him. The next morning, Keira rode into Watsonville with a desperate plan forming in her mind. The town was small but growing, with a main street that boasted a general store, a saloon, a church, the bank that was threatening to take everything, and a few other establishments that served the ranchers and farmers scattered across the surrounding valley. She tied her horse outside the saloon, knowing it was the best place to gather information about drifters and travelers. The bartender, a grizzled man named Pete who had known her father, gave her a sympathetic look when she walked in. It was early enough that the place was nearly empty, Just a couple of old-timers nursing beers in the corner. Miss Prescott, Pete said, wiping down the bar. What brings you in? You know your pa never liked you coming to places like this. I am looking for someone, Keira said, keeping her voice steady. A cowboy came through about 2 weeks back. Tall, dark hair, riding a roan horse. Said his name was Matthew Morgan. You remember seeing him? Pete scratched his chin. Morgan. Yeah, I remember him. Quiet fellow, nursed one beer and asked about work. I told him old man Henderson was looking for help on his spread near Moss Landing. Why you looking for him? I need to hire someone, Keira said, which was not exactly a lie. Do you know if he is still around? Henderson's place is about 10 miles northwest, right along the coast. If Morgan took the work, he would be there. Henderson runs a tough outfit, though, works his men hard. Keira thanked Pete and left before he could ask more questions. 10 miles was nothing. She could be there by early afternoon if she pushed her mare. She stopped by the general store to pick up supplies, and that was when she ran into Reverend Dalton. Miss Prescott, the Reverend said, his round face creasing with concern. I heard about your troubles with the bank. Terrible business. If there is anything the church can do to help. Actually, Reverend, there might be, Keira said, an idea crystallizing. If I were to marry, would you be willing to perform the ceremony quickly? I mean, without all the usual waiting and announcements. The Reverend blinked, clearly taken aback. Well, that is highly irregular, but given your circumstances, I suppose accommodations could be made. Do you have a suitor in mind? I am working on that, Keira said. The ride to Henderson's ranch gave her plenty of time to rehearse what she would say. The whole plan was insane, she knew that. She was going to propose a business arrangement to a man she had met once, a man who owed her nothing and had no reason to tie himself to a failing ranch, and a woman he barely knew. But desperation made people bold, and she had run out of better options. Henderson's spread was larger than she expected, with a proper bunkhouse and several corrals filled with horses. She found the old rancher himself near the main barn, shouting orders at a group of men working to break a wild Mustang. When she asked for Matthew Morgan, Henderson pointed toward the far pasture, Morgan's out riding fence. Good worker, that one, keeps to himself but does the job right. You need him for something. I need to speak with him. It is important. Henderson shrugged. Suit yourself. Take the trail east about a mile. You will find him. Keira followed the fence line, her heart pounding harder with each passing minute. What if he said no? What if he laughed at her? What if he was the kind of man who would agree, and then try to take everything for himself once the marriage was legal? She knew nothing about him, except that he had been polite and handy with a hammer. That was a thin foundation on which to build a marriage, even a marriage of convenience. She found him exactly where Henderson had said, dismounted and checking a section of fence that had been damaged, probably by deer or cattle pushing through. He looked up when he heard her horse, and she saw surprise flash across his face, followed by something that might have been pleasure. Miss Prescott, he said, straightening up, did not expect to see you out this way. Mr. Morgan, she said, staying in the saddle because it made her feel less vulnerable. I need to speak with you about a matter of some urgency. He dusted off his hands and walked closer, squinting up at her in the bright sunlight. He was even better looking than she remembered, with strong features and eyes the color of storm clouds. Is something wrong at your place? You need help with something, in a manner of speaking. Keira took a deep breath. I need a husband. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Matthew's expression did not change much, but she saw his shoulders tense slightly. That is a strange thing to tell a near stranger, he said carefully. I know how it sounds. But I am in trouble, and I have very few options. Quickly, she explained about the bank, the loan, the 30-day deadline. The law says I cannot hold the property without a man's name on the deed. I need a husband on paper, at least long enough to satisfy the bank and keep my land." Matthew was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "And you are asking me because? Because you are not from here. Because you do not have ties to this place that would complicate things. Because you were kind to me when you did not have to be." She paused. "And because I am desperate." "At least you are honest." He turned away, looking out at the ocean visible in the distance, a strip of blue against the horizon. "What exactly would this arrangement entail?" "We would marry legally. Your name would go on the deed alongside mine. Once the bank sees that I have a husband, they will extend the loan or renegotiate the terms. After that—" She hesitated. "After that, we could dissolve the marriage if you wanted, or you could stay on as a partner in the ranch. I would pay you a fair wage and a share of the profits." "And if there are no profits?" "Then we would both be poor together, but at least I would not lose my father's land." Matthew turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "You do not know anything about me. I could be a drunk, a gambler, a man who beats his wife." "You would be taking a hell of a risk." "I know. But staying unmarried is a guaranteed disaster. At least this way I have a chance." He walked closer, resting a hand on her horse's neck. The mare nickered softly, comfortable with his presence. "Why me specifically?" "There must be other men in Watsonville who would jump at the chance to marry you and get a ranch in the bargain. The men I know would expect a real marriage. They would expect me to give up control of the ranch, to become a proper wife in all ways. I cannot do that. I need someone who understands this is a business arrangement first. And you think I understand that? I hope you do." Matthew was silent again, and Keira felt her hope beginning to fray. Then he said, "If I agree to this, I want some things clear from the start. I am not going to cheat you or steal from you. I will work the ranch fair and honest, and I will expect the same from you. I am not looking for a wife in the traditional sense. I have been on my own too long to change my ways easily. But I also will not have people thinking I am a kept man or that you are running me like a servant. If we do this, we do it as partners, equal in the eyes of the law and the community." Keira felt a surge of relief so intense it made her dizzy. "Those terms are acceptable to me. One more thing." He looked up at her, his gray eyes serious. "If we are going to be married, even on paper, I will not have you taking other lovers or making a fool of me. I expect loyalty even if there is no love between us. Can you agree to that?" "Yes, and I expect the same from you." "Then I guess we have a deal." He held up his hand and she reached down to shake it. His grip was strong and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. "When do you need this to happen?" "As soon as possible. Today, if we can manage it." Matthew laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You do not waste time, do you?" "I have 30 days before the bank takes everything. I cannot afford to waste time." He nodded slowly. "All right then. Let me tell Henderson I am leaving. I will need to collect my wages and my gear. Then we can ride back to Watsonville and find that preacher of yours." "Thank you," Keira said, and the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he was agreeing to do. "Do not thank me yet," Matthew said. "We might both regret this before it is through." The ride back to Watsonville was strange, almost surreal. Keira led the way while Matthew followed on his roan, his few possessions tied behind his saddle. They did not talk much, both of them seemingly lost in their own thoughts about what they were about to do. The sun was past its zenith when they reached the town, and Keira led them straight to the small white church on the edge of the main street. Reverend Dalton was in his office, working on Sunday's sermon. He looked up in surprise when Keira knocked on his open door, and his surprise deepened when he saw the dusty cowboy standing behind her. "Miss Prescott, I did not expect you back so soon." "Reverend, this is Matthew Morgan. We would like you to marry us, today if possible." The Reverend stood up slowly, his eyes moving between them. "This is very sudden. Mr. Morgan, do you understand what you are entering into?" "I understand well enough," Matthew said. "Miss Prescott needs a husband, and I am agreeable to the arrangement. Marriage is more than an arrangement. It is a sacred covenant before God." "Then we will honor it as such," Keira said firmly. "Please, Reverend, I would not ask if it were not urgent." Reverend Dalton sighed, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but also sympathetic to Keira's plight. "Very well, but I will need witnesses. And I will need to file the proper paperwork with the county." "Whatever is required," Keira said. "Just please do it today." They found 2 witnesses easily enough, the Reverend's housekeeper and a church elder who happened to be visiting. The ceremony itself was brief and awkward, conducted in the small chapel with its simple wooden pews and plain glass windows. Keira wore the same dusty riding clothes she had been in all day, and Matthew still had dirt under his fingernails from working Henderson's fence. When the Reverend asked if she took this man to be her lawfully wedded husband, she said, "I do," in a voice that did not shake. When Matthew repeated the same vows, his voice was steady and calm, as if he married strangers every day of the week. The Reverend pronounced them man and wife, and Matthew kissed her cheek, a brief, chaste brush of lips that was over almost before it began. Then they signed the marriage certificate, and it was done. Keira Prescott was now Keira Morgan, and Matthew Morgan was legally entitled to half of everything she owned. They walked out of the church into the late afternoon sun, and Keira felt as if she had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting to see if she would fly or fall. "We should go to the bank," she said. "Get this recorded as soon as possible." "Lead the way, Mrs. Morgan," Matthew said, and there was a hint of irony in his voice that made her bristle slightly. The bank was still open, and the manager, a thin man named Silas Whitmore with a perpetual frown, looked up from his desk when they entered. His frown deepened when he recognized Keira. "Miss Prescott, I was not expecting to see you until you came to settle your affairs. It is Mrs. Morgan now," Keira said, placing the marriage certificate on his desk. "And I am here to inform you that my husband and I will be keeping the ranch. We will need to renegotiate the terms of the loan." Whitmore picked up the certificate and examined it with narrow eyes. "This was done today." "About an hour ago," Matthew said, stepping forward. "Is there a problem?" "No problem, just unexpected." Whitmore set the certificate down. "I will need to update our records, and we will need to have Mr. Morgan sign the loan documents. The terms remain the same, but the bank will need assurance that you can make the payments." "We will make the payments," Keira said firmly. "The ranch is profitable. We just needed time to get things in order after my father's death." "I see." Whitmore did not look convinced, but he could not argue with the law. A married woman with a husband to vouch for her was a different matter than a single woman on her own. "Very well. Come back tomorrow, and we will have the paperwork ready for you to sign." Outside, Keira felt the tension drain from her shoulders. The first hurdle was cleared. The bank would not take her land, at least not immediately. "Now what?" Matthew asked. "Now we go home," Keira said. "To the ranch. Your ranch too now, I suppose." They rode out of Watsonville as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The ranch looked different somehow when they arrived, as if acknowledging that things had changed. Keira dismounted and led her horse to the barn, acutely aware of Matthew following behind her. "There is a spare room in the house," she said as they unsaddled the horses. "You can stay there, or if you prefer, the bunkhouse is empty. My father's old foreman left when Papa died, and I have not been able to afford to hire anyone since." "The house is fine," Matthew said. "Unless you would rather I stay out here." No, the house makes more sense. People will expect us to share a home. We should at least maintain appearances. They walked to the house together, and Keira realized with a start that this was the first time she had brought a man into her home as an equal, not as a guest or a hired hand. It felt strange, almost invasive, even though she had been the one to invite him. She showed him the spare room, a small space with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the eastern hills. It had been her father's room before he got sick and moved to the larger room downstairs for easier access. "It is not much," she said. "It is more than I have had in a while," Matthew said, setting his saddle bags on the floor. "Thank you." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, and then Keira said, "I should make us some supper. You must be hungry." "I can help." They worked together in the kitchen, and Keira found herself surprised by how competent he was. He knew his way around a stove and a frying pan, cutting vegetables and stirring the pot without needing instruction. They made a simple meal of fried potatoes, bacon, and beans and ate at the small table near the window. "This is good," Matthew said after a few bites. "You are a fine cook. My mother taught me before she died. She said a woman needed to know how to feed her family, no matter what else she could do. Smart woman." "She was." Keira paused, then asked, "What about your family? You said you are from Texas originally." "Yes. My parents had a small farm near Austin. They died of fever when I was 16. After that, I worked wherever I could find it, ranches mostly. I have been moving around ever since. No brothers or sisters, a sister. She married a shopkeeper in San Antonio. We write sometimes, but we are not close. I am sorry. Do not be. It is just the way things turned out." He looked at her across the table. "What about you? Any family besides your father?" "No. My mother died when I was 12. It has been just me and Papa since then. He taught me everything about running the ranch. I can ride, rope, brand, and mend fence as well as any man." There was a defensive edge to her voice, and she realized she was trying to prove something to him. "I do not doubt it," Matthew said quietly. "You strike me as someone who does not give up easily." After supper, they cleaned up together, and then Keira showed him where the well was, where the tools were stored, and how the barn was organized. By the time they finished, full darkness had fallen and the stars were out in force, bright and clear in the country sky. "We should get some rest," Keira said. "There is a lot of work to do tomorrow." "Agreed." Matthew hesitated, then said, "Keira, I know this is not what you wanted, but I will do right by you, I promise." She looked at him, this stranger who was now her husband, and wanted to believe him. "I know you will. Good night, Matthew. Good night." She went to her room and closed the door, then sat on the edge of her bed and let out a long, shaky breath. She had done it. She had found a husband and saved the ranch, all in one desperate day. Now she just had to figure out how to live with the consequences. The next morning, Keira woke before dawn, as she always did, and went out to feed the chickens and milk the cow. She was surprised to find Matthew already in the barn, mucking out the stalls. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I know. But I am here now, and I might as well earn my keep." They worked together through the morning, settling into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Matthew was as competent as he had claimed, quick to learn the routines of the ranch and willing to take on any task without complaint. By mid-morning, they rode back into Watsonville to sign the bank papers. Whitmore had the documents ready, and Matthew signed where indicated, his handwriting neat and careful. The banker made copies for their records, and then it was official. Matthew Morgan was co-owner of the Prescott Ranch, and the bank had agreed to extend the loan for another 5 years at a slightly higher interest rate. "Congratulations," Whitmore said, though his tone suggested he was far from pleased. "I hope you know what you have gotten yourself into, Mr. Morgan." "I expect I will find out soon enough," Matthew replied evenly. As they left the bank, Keira felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The immediate crisis was over. Now came the harder part, figuring out how to make the ranch profitable enough to pay back the loan and learning to live with a husband she barely knew. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a routine. They worked the ranch together during the day, riding out to check the cattle, mending fences, and preparing for the coming winter. In the evenings, they shared meals and sometimes talked about the work that needed to be done. Matthew proved to be a skilled ranch hand, and Keira found herself relying on his judgment more than she had expected to. But there was always a distance between them, a careful politeness that reminded her this was a business arrangement, not a real marriage. They slept in separate rooms, ate at opposite ends of the table, and rarely touched except by accident. Keira told herself this was what she wanted, a partnership without the complications of emotion or intimacy. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, she wondered what it would be like to have a real husband, someone who held her and laughed with her and made her feel less alone. One evening in late October, a storm rolled in from the Pacific, bringing wind and rain that battered the ranch. They had spent the day moving the cattle to higher ground and securing anything that might blow away, and by the time they got back to the house, they were both soaked and exhausted. Keira changed into dry clothes and made coffee while Matthew built up the fire in the hearth. They sat together in front of the flames, warming their hands around their mugs and listened to the wind howl outside. "This is a good house," Matthew said. "Solid. Your father built it well." "He did everything well," Keira said. "He was the hardest working man I ever knew. Sometimes I think the work is what killed him. He never knew when to rest. You are a lot like him from what I can see." "Is that a criticism?" "No, just an observation." Matthew looked at her over the rim of his mug. "You push yourself hard, Keira, harder than you need to. Someone has to keep this place running. We are keeping it running, together. You do not have to do it all yourself anymore." She wanted to argue, to tell him she was fine, that she did not need anyone's help, but the truth was, she was tired. Tired of being strong all the time, tired of making every decision alone, tired of pretending she was not lonely. "I am not used to relying on anyone," she said quietly. "I know. But you can rely on me. I am not going anywhere." The words should have been comforting, but instead, they made her uneasy. She had promised herself she would not get attached, that this was just a business arrangement. But sitting here in the firelight with this man who had become her husband, she felt the walls she had built around her heart beginning to crack. November brought cooler weather and more rain. The grass turned green again after the dry summer, and the cattle grew fat on the new growth. Keira and Matthew worked side by side, their partnership becoming smoother with each passing day. She learned that he was patient with the horses, firm but kind, and that he had a quiet sense of humor that caught her off guard sometimes. He learned that she was fiercely independent but also fair, and that she had a habit of humming old songs while she worked. One afternoon, they were out riding the fence line when Matthew's horse threw a shoe. They were miles from the ranch, so they decided to walk the horse back slowly rather than risk laming it. The walk took hours, and by the time they got back, the sun was setting. "I am sorry," Matthew said as they led the horse into the barn. "I should have checked his shoes this morning." "It happens. No harm done." Keira helped him remove the saddle and blanket. "We can take him to the blacksmith tomorrow." As they worked, their hands brushed against each other, and Keira felt a jolt of awareness that surprised her. She looked up and found Matthew watching her, his expression unreadable. For a moment they stood frozen, the air between them charged with something she did not quite understand. Then Matthew stepped back, breaking the spell. I should wash up for supper. Right. Yes. I will get started on the cooking. That night, Keira lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the way Matthew had looked at her in the barn. There had been something in his eyes, something more than polite interest or friendly regard. It had made her heart race in a way that scared her. She reminded herself that this was not a real marriage, that they were partners in name only. But her heart did not seem to care about the rules she had set. The next day, they took the horse to the blacksmith in Watsonville. While they waited for the work to be done, they walked down the main street, and several townspeople stopped to congratulate them on their marriage. Keira noticed how easily Matthew played the part of her husband, nodding politely and accepting their good wishes with a smile that looked genuine. "You are good at this," she said as they walked toward the general store. "Good at what?" Pretending. "Making people believe we are a real married couple." Matthew stopped walking and looked at her. "Who says I am pretending?" She felt her breath catch. "What do you mean?" "I mean that this might have started as a business arrangement, but it has become more than that, at least for me. I care about you, Keira. I care about this ranch and this life we are building together. Maybe I did not mean to, but I fell for you anyway." Keira stared at him, her mind racing. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that they had an agreement and feelings were not part of it. But the words would not come because she knew, deep down, that she felt the same way. Somewhere along the way, between the morning chores and the evening meals and the quiet talks by the fire, she had stopped thinking of Matthew as a convenient solution to her problem and started thinking of him as someone she could not imagine living without. "Matthew," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. I am not going to pressure you or expect anything from you, but I am not going to pretend anymore that this is just business. Not when it feels like so much more." They stood there on the dusty street, people passing by them, and Keira felt the world shift beneath her feet. Everything she had thought she wanted, independence, control, safety from heartbreak, suddenly seemed less important than the man standing in front of her, looking at her with such honesty and hope. "I care about you too," she said finally. "I did not want to, I tried not to, but I do." Matthew smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. "Then maybe we can stop pretending and start being honest with each other, about everything. I would like that." He reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, and they stood there for a moment, just holding hands like sweethearts instead of business partners. It felt right in a way that nothing else had in a long time. That night, everything between them changed. They still slept in separate rooms, but the distance was gone. They talked more freely, laughed more easily, and touched more often, a hand on the shoulder, a brush of fingers, small gestures that said more than words ever could. December arrived, and with it came preparations for Christmas. Keira had not celebrated much since her father died, but Matthew insisted they at least get a tree and make the house festive. "It is tradition," he said when she protested, "and we could use something to celebrate." They rode out into the hills and cut down a small pine tree, dragging it back to the house and setting it up in the corner of the main room. Keira dug out the old decorations her mother had made years ago, strings of popcorn and dried berries, small wooden ornaments carved by her father's hand. As they decorated the tree together, Matthew told her stories about Christmases from his childhood, and she found herself laughing at his descriptions of his sister's terrible cooking and his father's off-key singing. "You miss them," she said. "I do. But I am glad to be here with you. This feels like home in a way nowhere else has in a long time." On Christmas Eve, they bundled up against the cold and rode into Watsonville for the church service. The small chapel was packed with ranchers and townspeople, all of them singing carols and celebrating the season. Keira sat next to Matthew in the pew, their shoulders touching, and felt a sense of peace she had not experienced in years. After the service, Reverend Dalton pulled them aside. "I am glad to see you both doing well. I had my doubts about your marriage at first, I will admit, but I can see now that it was meant to be. You look happy together." "We are," Keira said, and realized it was true. That night back at the ranch, they sat by the fire and exchanged small gifts. Keira had bought Matthew a new pair of leather work gloves, and he had carved her a beautiful wooden box for her keepsakes. It was simple but well made, with her initials carved into the lid. "It is beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Thank you." "There is something else," Matthew said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring, plain silver with a single small stone. "I know we got married without rings. I know this whole thing started as an arrangement, but I want you to have this if you will accept it. Not as a business partner, but as my wife. My real wife in every way that matters." Keira felt tears prick her eyes. "Matthew, I do not know what to say." "Say yes. Say you will stop thinking of this as a marriage of convenience and start thinking of it as the real thing. Because that is what it is for me. You are not just a partner or a friend. You are the woman I love." The words hung in the air, and Keira felt her heart swell with emotion. "I love you too," she said, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world to say. "I have loved you for weeks now, but I was too scared to admit it." Matthew slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he pulled her close and kissed her. A real kiss this time. Not the chaste brush of lips from their wedding day, but something deep and passionate and full of promise. Keira kissed him back, pouring all her feelings into that moment, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. "So we are really doing this?" she asked. "A real marriage, if you will have me." "I will. I do. I already did, I suppose, but now I mean it for real." They stayed up late that night, talking and kissing by the fire, and when they finally went to bed, it was together, in the room that had been Keira's alone for so long. They made love slowly and tenderly, learning each other's bodies and hearts in the quiet darkness, and when Keira fell asleep in Matthew's arms, she felt safer and happier than she had in years. The new year brought new challenges. The winter was harsh, with storms that battered the coast and cold snaps that threatened the cattle. But Keira and Matthew faced it together, working side by side to keep the ranch running. They moved the herd to sheltered valleys, broke ice on the water troughs, and spent long nights checking on newborn calves. In February, a neighbor's cattle broke through a section of shared fence and mixed with their herd. It took 3 days of hard work to sort out which animals belonged to whom, and the neighbor, a gruff man named Henderson, the same one Matthew had worked for briefly, was less than cooperative. "Your fence was weak," Henderson complained. "That is why my cattle got through." "Your cattle pushed through because you did not feed them properly," Matthew shot back. "They were looking for better grazing." Keira stepped between them before the argument could escalate. "Gentlemen, we can stand here and argue, or we can work together to fix the fence and make sure this does not happen again." "What will it be?" Henderson grumbled, but he agreed to help repair the fence. By the end of the day, the boundary was secure again, and Henderson grudgingly admitted that Matthew and Keira ran a tighter operation than he had given them credit for. "You are good at that," Matthew said as they rode home that evening. "Good at what?" "Keeping the peace. Making people work together even when they do not want to. Someone has to be the voice of reason, and it is usually not the men in my experience." Matthew laughed. "Fair point." By spring, the ranch was thriving. The cattle had survived the winter in good condition, and there were more calves than they had expected. The grass was growing thick and green, and the market prices for beef were higher than they had been in years. For the first time since her father's death, Keira felt confident that they would be able to pay off the bank loan ahead of schedule. One evening in April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Matthew said, "I have been thinking about expanding the herd. We have the grazing land and the market is strong. If we reinvest some of the profits, we could double our stock by next year." "That is a big risk," Keira said. "What if the market changes?" "It is always a risk, but I think it is worth it. This ranch has good bones, good land. We could build something really solid here, something that lasts." Keira looked at him, at the determination in his face and the hope in his eyes, and she realized that he was not just talking about the ranch. He was talking about their life together, their future. And she wanted that future as much as he did. "All right," she said. "Let's do it. Let's take the risk." They spent the next few months planning and preparing. They traveled to auctions, buying healthy stock at good prices. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, young men from Watsonville who were eager to learn. The ranch felt alive again, bustling with activity and purpose. In June, Keira discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when the doctor confirmed it, she felt a mixture of joy and terror. She and Matthew had talked about children in abstract terms, but now it was real, a tiny life growing inside her that would depend on them for everything. She told Matthew that evening after supper. He stared at her for a long moment, and then a grin split his face, wider than she had ever seen. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Yes, in about 7 months if the doctor is right." Matthew let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "This is amazing. This is the best news. We are going to be parents. Are you ready for this?" Keira asked, suddenly nervous. "It is going to change everything." "Of course it will, but we will figure it out together just like we have figured out everything else." He pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "This is our family now, you, me, and this little one, and I could not be happier." Keira felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. A year ago, she had been alone and desperate, facing the loss of everything she loved. Now she had a husband who adored her, a ranch that was thriving, and a baby on the way. It felt like a miracle. The summer was busy. They worked to get as much done as possible before the baby arrived, knowing that things would be more complicated once they had a newborn to care for. The cattle were doing well, and by late August, they had paid off half the bank loan. Whitmore had been grudgingly impressed when they came in with the money. "I did not think you would make it," he admitted, "but you have proven me wrong. The bank is pleased with your progress." "We will have the whole thing paid off within 3 years, Matthew said confidently. "Mark my words." As Keira's belly grew, Matthew became increasingly protective. He insisted she stop doing the heavier ranch work, and though she protested at first, she eventually agreed. The pregnancy was going well, but she was tired more easily, and she knew she needed to take care of herself and the baby. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk about the future. They debated names for the baby, argued good-naturedly about whether it would be a boy or a girl, and made plans for expanding the house to include a nursery. Matthew started building a cradle in his spare time, carving it carefully from sturdy oak. One night in September, as they lay in bed, Keira said, "Do you ever regret it, agreeing to marry me that day?" Matthew turned to look at her, his eyes soft in the moonlight. "Not for a single second. You gave me something I did not even know I was looking for. A home, a purpose, someone to love. I was just drifting before I met you. Now I have a reason to build something that lasts. I am so glad you said yes. I do not know what I would have done if you had not. You would have found another way. You are the strongest person I know." He placed his hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. "But I am glad I was the one you asked. I am glad I get to be here for all of this." The baby came in early January, during one of the coldest weeks of the year. Keira's labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Matthew feared he would lose her. But she fought through with the same determination she brought to everything. And when the midwife finally placed a squalling, red-faced baby girl in her arms, Matthew felt his heart might burst from the sheer intensity of his love. "She is perfect," Keira whispered, exhausted but radiant. "Look at her, Matthew. We made this." "She has your eyes," Matthew said, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "And she is as stubborn as you, I can tell already." They named her Kate Marie Morgan after Keira's mother and Matthew's mother. She was a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs, and she quickly became the center of their world. Matthew was a devoted father, taking turns with the nighttime feedings and diaper changes, and singing soft lullabies in his rough voice until Kate fell asleep. The ranch continued to prosper. By Kate's first birthday, they had paid off the bank loan entirely, and Whitmore had grudgingly congratulated them on their success. They celebrated with a party, inviting neighbors and friends from Watsonville, and everyone marveled at how much the ranch had grown under their stewardship. "You two have done what many said was impossible," Reverend Dalton said, raising a glass in toast. "You have built a life and a family on hard work and determination. May God continue to bless you." As Keira looked around at the gathering, at her husband holding their daughter at the home they had built together, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had married Matthew to save her land, but she had gained so much more. She had gained a partner, a love, and a future brighter than anything she had dared to imagine. The years that followed were good ones. They had 2 more children, a son named Michael and another daughter named Clara. The ranch grew into one of the most successful operations in the area, known for the quality of its cattle and the integrity of its owners. Matthew and Keira became pillars of the Watsonville community, respected and admired for what they had accomplished. But through all the success and all the years, what mattered most to both of them was the love they shared. It had started as an arrangement, a desperate solution to a pressing problem. But it had grown into something real and lasting, a partnership built on trust, respect, and deep affection. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matthew gave Keira a locket with a picture of them from their wedding day, that hasty ceremony in the little church when they were both scared and uncertain. "Look how far we have come," he said, his arm around her waist as they stood on the porch of the house they had built together. "I would not change a thing," Keira said, leaning into his embrace. "Not a single moment. Not even the part where you had to propose to a stranger. Especially not that part, because that stranger became the love of my life." Matthew kissed her then, a kiss full of the history and depth of 10 years together, 10 years of joy and struggle and growth. And as their children played in the yard, and the sun set over the land they had fought so hard to keep, Keira knew that she had found something far more valuable than property or security. She had found a home, not just in a place, but in the heart of the cowboy who had agreed to marry her and had somehow, against all odds, fallen in love with the wife he never meant to. The ranch continued to be their legacy. As the children grew, they learned the land and the work, carrying on the traditions that Matthew and Keira had established. Michael showed a natural talent with horses, while Kate had her mother's head for business, and Clara had inherited her father's patient, steady way with the cattle. In 1895, when Kate was 13, she asked her mother about the story of how she and Matthew had gotten married. They were sitting on the porch, shelling peas for supper, and the question came out of nowhere. Mama. Sarah Henderson said her mama told her that you and Papa got married because you needed to save the ranch. Is that true? Keira looked at her daughter, so much like her at that age, fierce and curious and unafraid to ask difficult questions. She could have lied or deflected, but she had always believed in honesty with her children. It is true in a way. When your grandfather died, the bank was going to take our land because I was unmarried, so I asked your father to marry me, even though we barely knew each other. That does not sound very romantic. It was not at first. We married because we needed to, not because we loved each other. But something wonderful happened. We learned to love each other. We built a life together, and that love grew stronger every day. Kate thought about this for a moment. So you fell in love after you got married? Yes. And that love was all the sweeter because we chose it. We did not have to stay together, not really. We could have ended the marriage once the ranch was secure, but we wanted to stay. We wanted to build a life together. I think that is romantic, Kate said. In its own way. Keira smiled and kissed her daughter's forehead. I think so too. That evening she told Matthew about the conversation. They were in bed, the house quiet except for the usual night sounds of the ranch. Do you think the kids will judge us for how we started? She asked. I think they will see that we created something good from a difficult situation. That is what matters. He pulled her closer. Besides, would you change it if you could? No. I would marry you 1,000 times over, arrangement or not. Good. Because I feel the same way. As the new century approached, bringing with it changes and challenges they could not have imagined, Matthew and Keira faced it all together. They weathered droughts and market crashes, illnesses and injuries, the heartbreak of watching their children grow up and leave to start their own lives. But through it all, they had each other, and the love that had grown from that desperate bargain made so many years ago. In 1905, on a warm summer evening, Keira and Matthew sat on the porch and watched the sunset, just as they had done countless times over the past 23 years. They were older now, with gray threading through their hair and lines etched around their eyes from years of sun and laughter. But they still held hands, still found comfort in each other's presence. You remember the day we met? Keira asked. When you rode up asking for work. I remember thinking you were the prettiest woman I had ever seen and also the most stubborn. I was not stubborn. I was determined. Same thing. Matthew squeezed her hand. I am glad you were determined enough to come find me and propose that crazy scheme. It was not that crazy. It worked, did it not? Better than either of us could have hoped. He looked out at the land, at the house they had expanded over the years, at the barns and corrals and grazing cattle. We built something good here, something that will last long after we are gone. We did, together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Keira leaned her head on Matthew's shoulder and felt the profound contentment of a life well lived. She had started out just trying to save her father's ranch, but she had gained a love story that spanned decades, a family that would carry on their legacy, and a partnership that had weathered every storm. The cowboy who had ridden into her life as a stranger had become her greatest treasure, and the marriage that began as an arrangement had blossomed into the deepest love either of them had ever known. It was not the story she had expected to live, but it was better than anything she could have imagined, and she would not have traded a single moment of it for anything in the world. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. Michael married a girl from Monterey and started his own ranch nearby. Kate married a banker from San Francisco, but remained deeply involved in the family business, bringing a sharp financial mind that helped them navigate the increasingly complex world of modern agriculture. Clara married a veterinarian and stayed on the home ranch, helping her parents as they grew older. In 1910, Matthew and Keira celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and a growing brood of grandchildren. The house was full of laughter and noise, and as Keira watched her family, she marveled at how her desperate plan had led to all of this. That night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, she and Matthew sat by the fire, just as they had done on so many nights over the years. 28 years, Keira said. Can you believe it? Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever. Matthew looked at her, his eyes still holding the same warmth they had when he first told her he loved her. I have never regretted a single day, Keira, not one. Neither have I. You saved me, you know, not just the ranch, but me. I was so lost after Papa died, I did not know how to move forward. You gave me hope and purpose and love. You saved me too. I was just drifting, moving from place to place with no real home. You gave me roots. You gave me a reason to stay and build something lasting. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Keira said, Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when I asked you to marry me? I said you were taking a hell of a risk. And I was. But it was the best risk I ever took. We both took a risk that day, and we both won. In 1912, Matthew fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. Keira nursed him day and night, refusing to leave his side even when the doctor suggested she get some rest. She had nearly lost him once to the fever, and she was not about to lose him now, not after everything they had been through. Matthew recovered, but slowly, and the illness left him weaker than he had been. He could no longer do the heavy ranch work, so he focused on training the younger hands and managing the business side of things. Keira, too, was slowing down, her joints aching on cold mornings and her energy not what it once was, but they adapted as they always had. Clara and her husband took over most of the day-to-day operations, while Matthew and Keira served as advisors and elders. They spent more time with their grandchildren, telling them stories of the old days and teaching them the values of hard work and integrity. One afternoon in the spring of 1915, Keira was working in the garden when one of her grandsons, Michael's oldest boy, came running up to her. Grandma, Papa Matthew is teaching me to rope. Come watch." Keira wiped her hands on her apron and followed the boy to the corral, where Matthew was indeed teaching the 8-year-old the basics of roping a fence post. Her husband's movements were slower than they once were, but his patience and skill were unchanged. "That is it, Jamie," Matthew encouraged. "Keep your wrist loose. Let the rope do the work." Keira stood at the fence and watched, her heart swelling with love. This was their legacy, not just the land or the cattle, but the knowledge and values they were passing down to the next generation. That evening she told Matthew, "You are a wonderful grandfather." "I learned from the best," he said. "Your father would be proud of what we built here, proud of our children and grandchildren. I think he would be, and I think he would be glad I married you. Even though I was a stranger and a drifter, especially because of that. You brought fresh perspective and new energy. You helped me see that change did not have to be scary, that it could be good." Matthew pulled her close. "We made a pretty good team, did we not? The best team." Then, now, and always. As they grew older, they spent more time reflecting on their life together. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the land they had fought so hard to keep, and talk about the journey they had taken together. "If you could go back and tell yourself anything on our wedding day, what would it be?" Matthew asked one evening. Keira thought about it. "I would tell myself not to be so scared. I was terrified that I had made a terrible mistake, that I had tied myself to a stranger who might hurt me or steal from me. I would tell myself that I was about to meet the love of my life, and that everything was going to be better than I could imagine. I would tell myself to be patient, Matthew said. "I wanted to tell you I loved you so much sooner than I did, but I was afraid of pushing you away. I would tell myself that you were worth waiting for and that our love would only grow stronger with time. We have been very lucky, you and I. Lucky and also stubborn. We did not give up on each other, even when things were hard. We did not give up on us." In 1918, as the world emerged from the devastation of the Great War, Keira and Matthew celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary. They were in their 60s now, their hair fully gray and their movements slower, but their love was as strong as ever. The ranch was thriving under Clara's management, and their children and grandchildren were all doing well. They had built something that would last for generations, a legacy of hard work, integrity, and love. One morning in late spring, Keira woke to find Matthew already up and dressed, standing at the window looking out at the sunrise. "Come back to bed," she said sleepily. "It is still early. I wanted to watch the sunrise. It is beautiful this morning." Keira got up and joined him at the window, wrapping her arms around him from behind. Together they watched as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, illuminating the land they had built their life on. "I love you," Matthew said, his voice quiet but firm. "I have loved you since the first time you smiled at me, and I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Keira said, "more than words can say." They stood there together, watching the new day dawn, and Keira felt a profound sense of peace. They had started with nothing but a desperate arrangement and a stranger's kindness, and they had built a lifetime of love and happiness. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for, and she was grateful for every single moment. As the years continued to pass, their family grew larger. More grandchildren were born and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper, adapting to the changing times while maintaining the core values that Matthew and Keira had established. In 1925, on their 43rd wedding anniversary, the family threw them a huge party. The entire community turned out to celebrate the couple who had become legends in their own right. The woman who had saved her father's ranch and the cowboy who had helped her build an empire. At the party, Kate stood up to give a speech. She was 52 now, elegant and successful, a force to be reckoned with in the business world. "My parents taught me that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every day," she said, her voice carrying across the crowded yard. "They chose each other when they barely knew each other, and they have chosen each other every day since. They have shown us what it means to be partners, to work together through good times and bad, to build something lasting and beautiful. Thank you, Mama and Papa, for showing us how it is done." As everyone applauded, Matthew and Keira stood together, holding hands as they always did. They were old now, their bodies worn from decades of hard work, but their eyes still sparkled when they looked at each other, and their love was as evident as it had been on their wedding day 43 years before. That night, alone in their bedroom, Keira said, "Do you think we did all right? With our lives, with our family, I think we did better than all right. We built something beautiful, Keira, not just this ranch, but a family that loves each other and knows how to work hard. That is a legacy worth leaving. I could not have done it without you. We did it together. That is the only way it would have worked." In the summer of 1928, Matthew's health began to decline more noticeably. He was 72 now, and the years of hard work were taking their toll. But he remained sharp and engaged, spending his days with his family and offering advice when asked. He took particular joy in his great-grandchildren, bouncing them on his knee and telling them exaggerated stories of the old days that made them giggle with delight. Keira, at 69, was in better health, but she worried constantly about Matthew. They had been together for so long that she could not imagine life without him. They were two halves of the same whole, and the thought of losing him terrified her. One evening in October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Matthew said, "I want you to promise me something. Anything. When I am gone, I want you to keep living. Really living. Do not just shut yourself away and mourn. Keep working with the family, keep enjoying your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Promise me you will not stop living." "Matthew, do not talk like that. You are not going anywhere." "We are both getting old, Keira. We have to face facts. But I need to know that you will be all right when I am gone." Keira felt tears streaming down her face. "I do not want to think about it. I do not want to imagine life without you. I do not want to leave you. But when the time comes, I need to know you will be all right. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You survived losing your parents, you saved this ranch, you built a family and a legacy. You can survive losing me too. I do not want to just survive. I want to live with you. And we will for as long as we can. But after that, you have to promise me you will keep going. For our children, for our grandchildren, for yourself. Promise me." Through her tears, Keira nodded, "I promise." Matthew pulled her close, and they sat together as the sun set, holding each other as they had done for nearly 5 decades. The world around them was changing rapidly, with automobiles and electricity and all manner of modern conveniences. But their love remained constant, a steady anchor in a shifting world. Matthew lived for another 3 years, and they were good years, filled with family gatherings and quiet moments together. He saw his youngest great-grandchild born, a boy named Matthew in his honor, and he spent his final days surrounded by the family he loved. When he died in the spring of 1931, the entire community mourned. The funeral was held at the same small church where they had been married almost 50 years before, and hundreds of people came to pay their respects to the man who had helped build one of the most successful ranches in California and had loved his wife with a devotion that had become legendary. Keira stood at his graveside, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and said her final goodbye to the cowboy who had changed her life. She placed a hand on the simple headstone and whispered, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for everything." In the months that followed, Keira struggled with her grief. The house felt empty without Matthew, and she often found herself turning to tell him something before remembering he was gone. But she kept her promise. She continued to work with the family, to spend time with her grandchildren, to live her life fully even though a part of her was missing. One afternoon, about a year after Matthew's death, Kate found her mother in the barn, looking at the old saddle Matthew had used for so many years. "Mama, are you all right?" "I miss him," Keira said simply. "Every day I miss him. We all do. He was a wonderful man, a wonderful father and grandfather. He was the love of my life. I never expected that, you know. When I proposed to him, I was just trying to save the ranch. I never imagined I would fall in love with him, that we would build this beautiful life together. But you did, and that love created all of this." Kate gestured around them, at the thriving ranch and the family that had grown from that desperate bargain so many years ago. "You and Papa showed us what real love looks like. Not the easy, romantic kind, but the hard-working, everyday kind that builds something lasting. Thank you for that, Mama." Keira hugged her daughter, grateful for the family she and Matthew had created. She lived for another 8 years, long enough to see her great-grandchildren grow and to know that the ranch would continue for generations. She spent her final years surrounded by love, telling stories of the old days, and passing on the wisdom she had gained over nearly 80 years of life. When she died in 1939, she was buried next to Matthew, their headstones side by side just as they had been in life. The inscription on her stone reads simply, "Keira Morgan, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she built a legacy of love. At her funeral, the Reverend, the successor to the one who had married them, spoke about the remarkable partnership between Keira and Matthew, how they had started with nothing but determination and had built an empire. But more importantly, he spoke about the love they had shared, a love that had started as an arrangement and had grown into something deep and lasting and beautiful. They showed us that love is not just something that happens to you, he said. It is something you build, day by day, choice by choice. They chose each other when they had every reason not to, and they kept choosing each other for nearly 50 years. That is the greatest love story I know. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of Keira and Matthew's descendants. Each generation added their own improvements and innovations, but they never forgot the foundation that had been laid by the cowboy and the woman who had wed only to keep the bank from her land. The story of how Keira and Matthew had met and married became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. It was a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, that love can grow in the most unlikely circumstances, and that a desperate arrangement can become the foundation for a legacy that lasts for generations. Years later, when Kate's granddaughter asked about the story, the old woman smiled and said, "Your great-great-grandmother was one of the bravest women I ever knew. She took a huge risk, asking a stranger to marry her. But that risk paid off in ways she never could have imagined. She found not just a husband, but a partner, a best friend, and the great love of her life. And from that love came all of us. So never be afraid to take a chance on love, even when it seems impossible. Sometimes the impossible turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you." The ranch still stands today, a testament to the determination of one woman and the loyalty of the cowboy who agreed to help her. And on the mantel in the main house, there sits a worn wooden box with initials carved in the lid, a simple Christmas gift from a husband to a wife, and a reminder that the greatest love stories are not always the ones that start with romance and passion. Sometimes they are the ones that start with desperation and a handshake, and grow into something beautiful through hard work, commitment, and the daily choice to love and be loved in return.